It started like any other Tuesday morning in the quiet town of Riverside. The sun hadn't quite risen yet, and the streets were still asleep, shrouded in the soft mist that clung to the grass like whispers of forgotten secrets. But as Emma Martinez tied the laces of her 5-year-old son Danny's shoes, she felt it a strange tug in the air, a pull that told her today would be different. She had no idea that this morning walk would change their lives forever. Danny didn't talk much. At 5 years old, most kids were chattering about cartoons, toys, or what they wanted for breakfast. Not Danny. He lived in a world of silence. Selective mutism, the doctor said. But Emma didn't see it as a problem. She saw it as Danny's way of speaking only when something truly mattered. It was a strange peace between them, unspoken, yet deeply felt. "Come on, sweetheart," Emma whispered, her voice barely above a soft breath. She helped Danny wrap his favorite blue blanket tightly around his shoulders before they stepped out the door. The chill of early autumn cut through her thin jacket, but Emma welcomed it. It was part of their ritual, her and Danny alone in the world before it came rushing back to life. They lived in a small apartment on the edge of Riverside, nestled between the rolling hills and the gentle curve of Miller's Canal. Every day at exactly 7:30 in the morning, Emma and Danny would walk the winding path that led to the riverbanks. It was their sacred routine, their time together before the world's demands began to claw at their lives. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the occasional rustling of leaves or the distant call of a bird in the trees. The oak trees lined the path like old sentinels, their branches reaching out to form a canopy of filtered sunlight. It was always peaceful here, with only the sound of their footsteps and the steady flow of the canal water to keep them company. "Which way today?" Danny to Emma asked, knowing full well that he'd point toward the canal path. It was always the same route, but she asked anyway, loving the smile that always crept across his face when he got to make a choice, even a small one. Danny tilted his head and without a word pointed toward the winding water. Emma nodded and they began their journey. The mist hung in the air, clinging to the wet grass, creating a dreamlike atmosphere as the world slowly began to stir around them. But something was different today. Danny, usually so calm and collected, was walking with an unusual sense of purpose. His grip on her hand tightened, his pace slowed. Emma felt a small shiver of unease as she watched him. His dark eyes, usually so intent on the ground or his blanket, were now scanning ahead as if searching for something in the distance. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Emma asked softly, her voice full of concern. But Danny didn't respond. Instead, he let go of her hand and walked ahead more purposefully now. "Hey, Danny, wait for me," Emma called, quickening her pace to catch up. Her heart rate picked up, a slight flutter of panic in her chest. This was unusual. Danny never strayed from her side. He was cautious, always preferring the safety of routine and proximity to his mother. But not today. He walked with determination, his tiny feet carrying him toward the canal's edge where the reeds and cattails grew thick, almost as if they were protecting something. The morning mist was heavier here, enveloping the path in an ethereal fog that made everything seem distant, dreamlike. Emma's voice was tight with worry now. "Danny, stop." But Danny didn't stop. He stood perfectly still at the water's edge, staring down into the murky depths. Emma's heart stopped. It wasn't the canal, the ducks, or even the stray cats that sometimes wandered here. It was what Danny was staring at. Half hidden in the thick mud tangled in the reeds was a large German shepherd. Its fur was matted with dirt and debris, barely recognizable as a coat anymore. The dog was pressed against the muddy bank, its body trembling as it struggled to free itself from the muck. "Shh! Oh my God!" Emma whispered under her breath, the words tumbling out in shock. She instinctively moved forward, reaching out to pull Danny back from the edge. But Danny didn't move. He just stood there, his small body perfectly still, eyes locked onto the dog. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she watched him. There was something in his expression that stopped her. Something that wasn't fear. It was concern, determination, and something else. Recognition, perhaps. The dog's eyes were open, looking directly at Danny, its labored breathing misting in the cold air. Emma's heart raced. This wasn't just a stray dog. It was in distress, and Danny knew it. He could sense its fear, its pain. "Danny, please, we need to step back," Emma said, her voice trembling. "That dog might be hurt, and hurt animals can be dangerous." But Danny shrugged away from her hand the first time he had ever done that. Instead, he took a step closer to the edge, his small body moving with a calm determination that Emma couldn't quite explain. "Danny, no?" she said, her voice more insistent now, panic beginning to rise in her chest. But Danny didn't stop. He moved closer to the dog, the mud squelching beneath his shoes. Emma's maternal instinct screamed at her to grab him to pull him back to safety. But something in his movements made her hesitate. The way he walked, the way he approached the dog, it was so deliberate, so careful. He wasn't scared. He wasn't rushing. He was doing what he knew he needed to do. "Danny, no," Emma called again, her voice breaking. But Danny didn't look back. He reached the dog's side, kneeling down into the mud without hesitation. Emma's heart pounded as she watched him. Her mind screamed at her to stop him, but she couldn't. Something about the moment, the way Danny moved, the way the dog responded to him, held her in place. "Danny," she whispered, her voice almost a prayer. "Be careful." Danny gently reached out and placed his hand on the dog's head. The effect was immediate. The German Shepherd's trembling stopped, its breathing began to steady, and its eyes softened. It was as if the dog knew it was no longer alone, that someone was there to help. "Easy," Danny whispered. Emma froze, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't heard Danny speak in months, not a word. And now here he was, talking to the dog with a voice so soft, so calming, that it took Emma's breath away. In that moment, Emma knew something profound was happening here. Something she didn't fully understand yet. Don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals on YouTube to stay tuned for more incredible rescue stories like this. Together we can share these heartwarming journeys and show the world the deep bond between humans and animals. As Danny stroked the dog's fur, the tension that had been in the animal's body slowly melted away. Emma felt the weight of the situation, a mixture of awe and disbelief. What was happening here? And more importantly, why did Danny seem to understand this dog so deeply? This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a beginning of something far greater than they could have imagined. Danny knelt beside the dog, his small hand still resting gently on its head. Emma watched in stunned silence as the German Shepherd, once trembling in fear and pain, seemed to breathe more easily. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. The dog, who looked like it had been through hell, was calming under the touch of her son, who hadn't spoken more than a few words in months. For a long moment, everything was still, just Danny the dog and the soft murmur of the canal beside them. Emma couldn't quite place the feeling that had settled in her chest. It was a strange combination of fear, awe, and something she couldn't name, but it tugged at her heart in a way she couldn't ignore. What had her son done to this dog? Why was it responding to him like this? "Easy," Danny whispered again, his voice barely audible, but unmistakably there. Emma could hardly believe her ears. She had been trying to get Danny to speak for months, but now, here in this moment with a dog they barely knew, he was talking, and his words had the kind of power that made Emma's heart skip a beat. The German Shepherd's body seemed to relax completely under Danny's touch. It was still covered in mud, with fur matted and unkempt, but the way it responded to Danny was unlike anything Emma had ever seen. The dog lifted its head slightly, its eyes locking onto Danny's with an almost human understanding. A faint, barely noticeable wag of its tail sent a shiver down Emma's spine. This wasn't just a dog. This was something more. "What are you doing?" Emma whispered, but she didn't really expect an answer. She was almost afraid to ask. Her son had always been different, quiet, reserved. He had retreated into his shell after his father left, speaking less and less with each passing day. Emma had learned to accept it. After all, they were in this together. She and Danny surviving day by day in a world that sometimes felt too big, too loud, too overwhelming for her son. But now, as she watched Danny interact with this injured dog, something inside Emma began to shift. There was a depth to Danny's silence, a quiet wisdom that seemed to be unraveling before her eyes. Was it possible that he had always known this bond with animals? Or was it something new, something he had unlocked in this moment of need? The German Shepherd let out a soft, pained whine as it shifted slightly, its legs trapped beneath the muck. Emma's heart lurched. The dog was still in distress, still unable to fully free itself from the mud that had entangled it. Danny's eyes never wavered from the dog. His small fingers gently stroked the dog's head, the same way he would calm a stuffed animal before bed. Emma watched, torn between awe and concern. How was Danny doing this? Why did the dog seem to trust him? "Danny, we need to help him," Emma said, her voice shaking now, but she couldn't take her eyes off her son. Without saying a word, Danny stood up, still staring down at the dog. He looked back at Emma, his eyes filled with purpose. We can help him, Mom, Danny said, his voice surprisingly steady. Emma's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the first time Danny had spoken since his father left, but hearing him speak so clearly, so determined, made her stomach flutter. It was as if this moment, this dog had brought him back to life in a way Emma couldn't quite understand. Emma hesitated for a moment, but Danny's words and the look in his eyes told her that this was no longer just about rescuing an animal. It was about something much deeper, something that went beyond their little family, beyond what Emma had ever imagined possible. She nodded, her heart swelling with pride for her son. "Okay, sweetheart," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's help him." Together, they carefully worked to position Danny's blanket under the dog. It wasn't easy. The mud was thick and heavy, and the dog's legs were caught fast. But Danny, ever determined, never wavered. He kept calm, his small hands moving with purpose, as if he had done this 1,000 times before. "We're almost there, boy," Danny murmured to the dog, his voice soothing and low. Emma was amazed. Where had this confidence come from? This was the same boy who had once barely spoken a word to her, the same boy who had withdrawn into himself after everything had fallen apart. Yet here he was, leading the charge, saving a life. "Okay, on three," Emma said, her voice firm but shaking. "1, 2, 3. With all their strength combined, Emma and Danny tugged at the blanket, slowly inching the dog free from the mud. The German Shepherd let out a soft yelp of pain, but it didn't pull away. Instead, it seemed to help, pushing with its hind legs, as if it understood the plan. Inch by inch, they made progress, and with one final effort, the dog was free. Emma let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She stood back, watching as the dog, though weak and trembling, slowly got to its feet. It swayed for a moment, unsure of itself, before it steadied and turned toward Danny. To Emma's shock, the German Shepherd, still covered in mud, and looking like it had been through hell, walked over to Danny and nuzzled against his chest. It was the strangest thing. This dog, which had been so close to death, was now pressing itself against her son, as though Danny were its savior. "You're okay now," Danny whispered softly, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she watched the tenderness in Danny's gesture. This was more than just a boy comforting a dog. It was something unspoken, something profound. The dog licked Danny's cheek in a weak but affectionate gesture, and Emma saw something in that moment that she hadn't seen in a long time, her son truly present, fully engaged with the world around him. Emma's heart swelled. This was the son she had been hoping for. The boy who had retreated into his shell after his father left, the boy who had been silent for so long, was now opening up, not just to her, but to this dog, this wounded animal, who had come to them when they least expected it. But as Emma watched the dog and Danny, a creeping sense of unease began to settle in the pit of her stomach. There was more to this dog than she could see, more to this story than just a simple rescue. The way the dog had looked at Danny, the way it responded to him, it wasn't just a random stray. It was as if they had been connected in some way long before this moment. Emma reached out to touch the dog's head, gently feeling its warmth against her hand. She felt a spark of recognition, though she couldn't explain why. The dog had been through something terrible. She could see it in the way it moved, the way it carried itself, as if it had been hurt, not just physically, but emotionally. The scars on its body weren't just from the mud. There was something else, something darker lurking beneath the surface. "Mom, we have to take him to Dr. Sarah," Danny said suddenly, his voice more certain than it had been all morning. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She looked at her son, then at the dog. She knew that Danny wasn't just talking about a physical injury. He was talking about something else, something deeper. "Okay, sweetheart," Emma said softly as she glanced around the path, the eerie feeling still lingering in the air. "Let's get you both somewhere safe. We'll figure this out." The walk to Dr. Sarah's clinic felt longer than usual. Emma tried to keep her thoughts focused, but they kept drifting back to the strange turn their morning had taken. The dog, Max, as Danny had named him, was walking beside them now, a little steadier on his feet, but still limping. Danny's hand was wrapped gently around the dog's neck, his fingers barely brushing the dog's muddy fur. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play here. How could Danny, her son, who had been so withdrawn, suddenly be the one to connect so deeply with this animal? She couldn't help but wonder, what had this dog been through? "Mom," Danny said suddenly, pulling her from her thoughts. His voice was soft, but there was a new depth to it, something she hadn't heard in months. "What is it, sweetheart?" Emma asked, glancing down at him. Max says, "He's not just lost, he's been hurt." Danny's words hung in the air, heavier than she expected. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had seen the scars and the strange collar, but hearing it from Danny made everything feel so much more real, more urgent. This wasn't just about finding a dog a new home. This dog had been through something terrible, something beyond what Emma could imagine. "Let's just get to Dr. Sarah's," Emma said, forcing herself to stay calm. "We'll figure it out there." As they approached Dr. Sarah's clinic, Emma noticed Max seemed more alert. His ears twitched at every noise, his head turning quickly to look at any sound. The dog was scanning their surroundings constantly, like he was waiting for something. Maybe it was the trauma, Emma thought. Maybe it was just the dog's instinct. Dr. Sarah's clinic was tucked into a quiet part of Riverside, an old Victorian house converted into a veterinary practice. The building had character with its white picket fence, winding garden paths, and the faint smell of pet-friendly shampoo wafting out whenever the door opened. It was a place Emma had visited many times before, the kind of clinic where you knew the animals were treated with care. "Come on, Max," Danny said gently, tugging on the dog's leash. Max followed, his limp still noticeable, but less pronounced than when they first found him. As they entered the clinic, the familiar jingle of the bell above the door rang in Emma's ears. But today it felt strange. Everything was quiet, almost too quiet. It was like the calm before a storm, and Emma could feel it settling in her chest. They walked up to the counter where Dr. Sarah, a woman in her mid-50s with graying hair and kind blue eyes, stood. She looked up from the papers on her desk, her face lighting up when she saw Emma and Danny, but then faltering as she took in their muddy, disheveled appearance. "Emma, Danny," she said warmly, her voice carrying concern. "What happened? You two look like you've been through a war." We found a dog," Emma began, her voice wavering. "He's hurt and I'm not sure what happened to him, but he's in bad shape. We just want to make sure he's okay." Dr. Sarah's eyes immediately went to Max, and her expression shifted to one of focused concern. "What happened to him?" she asked, walking around the counter to kneel next to the dog. Danny moved aside to let Dr. Sarah examine Max, his eyes fixed on her every movement. Max didn't flinch when Dr. Sarah gently lifted his paw and checked his injuries. He seemed to understand that she was trying to help, and Emma couldn't help but feel a little relieved. At least here in this clinic, Max was in safe hands. "Poor guy," Dr. Sarah murmured. "He's been through quite a bit. What's his name?" "Max," Danny answered, his voice calm and certain. "He's a good boy." As Dr. Sarah checked Max's ears and examined his body for any further injuries, Emma stood back watching the scene unfold. She had always trusted Dr. Sarah, but there was a nagging feeling in the back of her mind. She knew that this wasn't just a case of an abandoned dog. There was something more. The scars on Max's body, the strange collar, the way Danny had been able to communicate with him, none of it added up to a simple, stray dog. After a few moments, Dr. Sarah looked up at Emma, her face serious. "There's something not right here, Emma. I've seen injuries like this before, small shaved patches of fur marks on the skin that aren't from just regular accidents. This dog's been through something medical." Emma's stomach churned. She hadn't wanted to believe it, but deep down she knew Dr. Sarah was right. Max's injuries weren't from a regular dog fight or an accident. This was something more. "What kind of medical procedures?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Sarah hesitated, then sighed. "I've seen these kinds of things before, but not here. These marks. It's possible this dog has been part of some kind of research. A testing facility, maybe. I can't be sure without more tests, but this isn't normal." Emma's heart sank. She looked at Danny, who had been unusually quiet since they entered the clinic, and saw a look in his eyes she hadn't seen in months: focus, intensity. It was as if he already knew what was going on. And in that moment, Emma realized something. Danny wasn't just an observer of this dog's pain. He was part of it. Somehow this dog's story was intertwined with his, and she didn't know how to untangle it. "Research," Emma repeated, her voice trembling. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean, there are places, facilities, that do experiments on animals. They implant devices, inject them with substances, or expose them to harmful environments. Sometimes it's for medical research, sometimes for military purposes. But whatever the reason, it's not right." Dr. Sarah paused, her eyes studying Max's collar. "This collar, it doesn't look like a regular pet collar. It's more like something military or government would use. And those marks on his body, they don't look like just cuts or scrapes. They're more deliberate, like they were trying to monitor him, control him in some way. Emma felt her legs go weak. She sat down in the nearest chair, trying to absorb what Dr. Sarah was saying. The idea that Max had been a part of something like that was too much. But as she looked at her son, the quiet way he was communicating with the dog, she couldn't ignore the truth that was slowly unraveling. This wasn't just about rescuing a dog from the mud. This was about something much bigger. Danny turned to Emma, his face serious. Mom, Max says he didn't want to hurt anyone. He was scared. He was being made to do things that weren't right. He wanted to run away. Emma felt a cold chill run down her spine. Her son's words were unsettling, but there was a certainty in his voice that made it impossible to dismiss. Dr. Sarah stood up, a grim look crossing her face. You need to be careful, Emma. If this dog really did escape from a research facility, especially one connected to something like Blackwater Defense, you could be in danger. People don't let their property go that easily. Emma's heart raced. Blackwater. The name sounded like a bad dream, a name she had only heard in whispered rumors. But now, hearing it out loud, it felt like a nightmare come to life. We have to take him, Danny said firmly, as though it was already decided. Max is part of our family now. He's not going back. Emma looked at her son. For the first time in what felt like years, Danny was standing tall. He was confident, sure of himself. And in that moment, she realized that this wasn't just about protecting Max. It was about protecting her son and whatever strange connection he had with this dog. Okay, Emma said, her voice steady but her mind racing. We'll take him, but we have to be smart. Dr. Sarah nodded, looking at them both with new respect. I'll help you. I'll make sure Max gets the care he needs. But you need to be prepared. If Blackwater comes looking, you can't just hide. This is bigger than you realize. Emma didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for sure: their lives would never be the same. The ride back from Dr. Sarah's clinic was a blur. Emma couldn't seem to focus on anything, not even the road in front of her. The words Dr. Sarah had spoken kept echoing in her head. Research, Blackwater, military experiments. She kept trying to push the thoughts away, but they came crashing back one after another, like waves she couldn't outrun. As they pulled into the parking lot of their apartment complex, Emma's heart began to race again. She had barely processed what Dr. Sarah had said when the thought hit her. What if they were already looking for Max? The idea made her stomach twist in knots. If Max had escaped from some sort of government or military project, there was no telling what lengths people might go to get him back. Mom Danny's voice snapped her out of her spiraling thoughts. She glanced over at him, and for the first time all day, she saw something in his eyes that unsettled her, an almost knowing calm resolve. We're not safe here, are we? He asked, his voice steady, unshaken. Emma swallowed hard. She had been trying to shield him from the reality of their situation, but it seemed Danny already knew the truth that terrified her. No, they weren't safe here. Not for long, Emma replied, her voice tight. But we'll figure it out, Danny. We'll be okay. Max, who had been lying quietly at Danny's feet during the ride, lifted his head at the sound of Emma's voice. He turned his dark eyes toward her, and in that moment she realized how much more than a dog he had become in their lives. Max was a protector. He had a bond with Danny that went deeper than anything Emma could understand. She wasn't sure what had happened to him or what he had been through, but she knew one thing for certain: they couldn't go back to the way things were. They couldn't go back to living a quiet, unnoticed life. Not now. Not when there were people out there, dangerous people, who would stop at nothing to take Max back. They parked the car, and Emma glanced over at Danny, who was already unbuckling his seatbelt, ready to move. He had been quiet during the drive, his usual silence amplified by the weight of the day. But now there was a new kind of intensity in him. Emma couldn't help but feel that whatever was about to happen, whatever they were about to face, Danny was ready for it. He had already faced so much more than most kids his age. The loss of his father, the silence that had taken over him, and now this. Let's get inside, Emma said, her voice firm. She opened the door and stepped out, Max following her like a shadow, his eyes scanning their surroundings, always alert. It was almost as if he knew they were being watched. Emma didn't want to admit it to herself, but she felt the same. There was something about the way Max carried himself now, so vigilant, so aware, that made her uneasy. They were being hunted. She could feel it in her bones. As they walked toward their apartment, Emma kept glancing around, her nerves on edge. The complex was usually quiet, but today it felt different. Every little sound, every footstep, every creak of the building seemed louder, more ominous. She didn't like it. The feeling of being watched intensified when Emma reached the front door. Her hand froze just inches away from the doorknob. Something was wrong. A chill ran down her spine as she turned to look over her shoulder. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw a black sedan parked across the street just beyond the parking lot. Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't have to be a genius to know that this wasn't a coincidence. She had seen that car before. It had been there when she and Danny left for Dr. Sarah's clinic. And now it was back. Mom Danny's voice again, but this time his tone was different. There was a new edge to it. He was scared. "Come on," Emma said quickly, opening the door and stepping inside. She motioned for Danny to follow. "We need to stay inside. Stay quiet. Don't open the door for anyone." Once inside, Emma double-locked the door and drew the curtains, blocking out the world outside. She glanced at Max, who was standing by Danny's side, his eyes still fixated on the window. The dog seemed to sense the tension in the air. His ears were perked up, and his body was coiled, ready to spring into action at any moment. "Mom, do you think they're here for Max Danny?" asked his voice, quiet but full of uncertainty. Emma swallowed hard. "Yes, sweetheart, I think they're here for him, but we're not going to let them take him." Her words felt weak in her own ears. She had no idea how they were going to stop whoever was outside, but she knew they had to. For Danny, for Max, for their family. Whatever was about to happen, Emma wasn't going to let anyone take that away from them. Max padded softly over to Danny, sitting at his feet, his head resting on Danny's lap. The dog's presence was oddly calming, and for a moment Emma allowed herself to breathe. But the sense of dread wouldn't let go. She knew what was coming, and she didn't know if they were ready for it. Mom Danny whispered, his voice barely audible. He had his hand on Max's head, and the two of them, man and dog, were connected in a way Emma couldn't quite comprehend. "Max says we have to leave. He says we're not safe here." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Leave? Where would they go? She hadn't prepared for this. She hadn't prepared for people coming after them after Max. But as she looked down at Danny, his face serious, his hand resting on the dog, Emma realized that they didn't have a choice. "Okay," Emma said softly, "we'll leave. But we have to be smart. We have to be careful." She began to gather a few essentials, her purse, Danny's backpack, some clothes, and tucked them into a small duffel bag. As she did, she kept glancing out the window, watching the sedan across the street. It hadn't moved. A knock at the door made her jump. Her heart pounded in her chest. They had found them. "Who is it?" Emma called, trying to keep her voice steady. She hoped the tension in her voice wasn't as obvious as it felt. "We know you're in there." A deep voice called back from the other side of the door. It was cold, authoritative. "Open up." Emma's stomach churned. This was it, the moment she had feared. Danny's hand tightened on Max's collar. The dog's eyes were wide, focused on the door, his muscles tense. He knew what was at stake here. "I'm not opening this door," Emma said firmly, the fear in her voice masked by a sense of resolve she hadn't known she had. "You're not taking him." "Open the door," the voice repeated louder this time. "You can't hide forever? We'll take the dog and you'll never see him again." Emma turned to Danny, her heart breaking. "We can't stay here," she whispered. "We need to get out of here now." But as Emma grabbed Danny's hand and moved toward the back door, she caught one last glimpse of the black sedan outside. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. There was no going back. There was no returning to their quiet life, to the safety of their old routine. Everything had changed in the last 24 hours. She took a deep breath and opened the back door. The cold night air rushed in and the unknown stretched out before them. "Let's go," Emma said, her voice steady but filled with the kind of fear only a mother could feel. The cold air hit Emma like a slap in the face as she stepped out the back door of their apartment. She quickly closed it behind her, locking it tight, and tried to steady herself. The night was dark, the sky dotted with stars, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Her heart raced, her breathing shallow. Everything she had known was unraveling in a way she couldn't fully grasp. Danny was right beside her, his small hand gripping hers tightly. Max walked beside them, moving with purpose, his eyes darting to every corner and every shadow. Emma could feel the tension in the air, and she could see it in Max's every movement. He was alert, hyper-aware of everything around him, and that only made Emma more nervous. "We need to move fast," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "We can't stay in the apartment anymore. Not with them out there. "Where do we go, Mom?" Danny asked, his voice quiet but full of understanding. It wasn't the first time he had seen fear in her eyes, but it was the first time he had truly sensed the danger. "I don't know yet," Emma admitted, squeezing his hand. "But we'll figure it out. We're going to be okay. We just need to stay calm." The two of them had no plan, no destination. But Emma's gut told her that running was their only option. They had no idea what kind of people were looking for Max or what they would do to get him back. But one thing was clear: those people were dangerous, and they wouldn't stop until they had him. "Max says we need to go to Rachel," Danny said softly, his voice cutting through the cold air. Emma stopped in her tracks. "Rachel," she repeated, furrowing her brow. Rachel Morrison was a woman Danny had mentioned earlier, the one who had been helping animals escape from research facilities. But Emma hadn't given her much thought. She hadn't even known where Rachel lived or how to find her. Danny nodded, looking up at her with a steady gaze. "Max says she helps animals like him. He knows she can help us." Emma looked down at Max, who was standing beside Danny, his ears perked up and his body tense. He was waiting for her to make a decision. And in that moment, Emma knew that Danny trusted this woman. He trusted Max's instincts. Maybe it was crazy, but she trusted them too. "Okay," Emma said, her voice steady now. "We'll go to Rachel." She didn't know what Rachel would be able to do, but at this point it was their only shot. If Max had been part of some government experiment, there was no telling what would happen to him if he was found. Emma wasn't going to let that happen. Not to Max, not to Danny. Max led the way, his body moving with surprising speed and confidence despite the limp. Emma followed closely behind with Danny at her side, his small hand still holding tightly to hers. They moved quickly, weaving through the darkened streets of Riverside. The town seemed different now. Everything felt more dangerous, more uncertain. It wasn't the sleepy, peaceful place Emma had once known. It felt like everything had shifted overnight. As they walked, Emma couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, her senses on high alert. Every car that passed, every footstep she heard, made her heart skip a beat. It wasn't just her imagination. She knew they were being watched. Someone was following them, and it wasn't just the shadows that moved in the dark. Danny seemed to sense it too. He turned to her and whispered, "They're coming, Mom." Emma didn't respond. She couldn't. She just kept moving her legs, feeling like lead as she walked, but she had no choice. The thought of stopping, of letting fear take over, wasn't an option. She couldn't let them catch up to them. She couldn't let them take Max away. They reached the edge of town and the path that led out toward the woods. The trees were dense, their branches reaching high into the sky, forming an almost impenetrable canopy. Emma didn't like it here. The woods were dark and full of unknowns. But at this point, she didn't have a choice. The only way out was forward. Max was ahead of them now, moving with purpose through the trees, his body cutting through the brush like a shadow. Emma had no idea where Rachel's place was, but she knew Max did. She trusted him just like Danny did. There was no other way. They walked in silence, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the occasional rustle of animals in the woods. Emma kept looking over her shoulder, her heart thudding in her chest. She had never felt so vulnerable. But Danny was different. He walked beside her, his hands steady in hers, as though he had known all along that this was where they were headed. The bond between him and Max was growing stronger by the minute. It was undeniable. And Emma couldn't help but feel a surge of pride for her son. He had found his voice again, his purpose, all because of this dog. Max had become his anchor, his guide. And now he was their only hope. After what felt like an eternity of walking, they reached the clearing. It wasn't much, a small, dilapidated cabin tucked away at the edge of a lake. There was no sign of life, no lights in the windows, no indication that anyone was home. But Max stopped in front of the cabin, his body still, his eyes fixed on the door. Emma knew they had arrived. Danny tugged at her hand. "Max says she's here," he said, his voice filled with quiet confidence. Emma nodded, taking a deep breath. She was about to knock on the door of a stranger's house, someone who might be able to help, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was exactly where they needed to be. She knocked softly at first, but there was no answer. Just as she was about to knock again, the door creaked open, slowly revealing a woman in her 60s, her silver hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. Her face was warm, welcoming, but her eyes immediately went to Max. "Well, hello there," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You must be Max." She looked at Emma and Danny, then back to the dog. "Come on in," she said, stepping aside to let them enter. Emma hesitated for just a moment before stepping inside. She didn't know what to expect, But at this point, she was willing to put her trust in this woman, just as Danny had. "Thank you," Emma said, her voice full of gratitude. "We didn't know where else to go." The woman smiled, her eyes soft with understanding. "I know why you're here. Max has been telling me his story, and I've been expecting you." "Expecting us?" Emma asked, surprised. The woman nodded. "I've been helping animals like Max for years. He's not the first to escape, and he won't be the last. I know what they've done to him, and I know how to keep him safe." Emma felt a weight lift from her chest. This woman, Rachel, knew more about Max's past than anyone, and that gave Emma a strange sense of relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt like they might actually be safe. But there was still one question that loomed over everything. The question that had been hanging in the air since they left the apartment. What would happen next? Rachel seemed to sense the uncertainty in Emma's eyes. She placed a hand on her shoulder, her touch comforting. "You're safe here for now, but we need to move quickly. Blackwater isn't going to stop looking for Max." Rachel's cabin was small, but it had a warmth that Emma hadn't felt in a long time. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books and photographs of dogs, rescued dogs, Emma assumed. There were no signs of modernity here, no flashing lights or buzzing electronics. It was the kind of place that felt timeless, like a haven tucked away from the world's troubles. Max seemed to settle in as soon as they stepped inside, curling up in a corner of the room near the wood-burning stove, his eyes half closed in contentment. Danny, who had been unusually quiet since they arrived, sat down beside him, gently stroking the dog's head, as if he was making sure everything was okay. Emma watched them, heart swelling with a mixture of pride and worry. Danny had found something in Max that she had never been able to give him comfort, understanding a connection that went beyond words. Rachel didn't waste any time. She immediately set about making them feel at home, offering them tea and a seat by the fire. Her movements were deliberate, calming, like she had done this 1,000 times before. She didn't ask questions right away, giving Emma space to settle her thoughts. She knew the tension was thick, and Rachel didn't want to add to it. "So," Rachel said, settling into an armchair across from them, "you came for help, and you're right to be here." Emma looked at her, the weight of everything they had been through pressing heavily on her shoulders. "I don't know where else to go," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. This isn't just about a lost dog. It's about more than that. There are people out there looking for him. People who won't stop until they get him back." Rachel nodded, her expression serious. "I know exactly who you're talking about. Blackwater Defense? They're the worst of the worst. They've been conducting experiments for years on animals, on people. I've been trying to expose them for a long time. But they're dangerous, Emma. They don't play by the rules." Emma felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The name Blackwater sent chills through her body every time she heard it. She knew it wasn't just a company, it was a shadow, a force, something that operated in the darkness, unaccountable to anyone. "Max isn't the first animal to escape from their clutches." Rachel continued, her voice tight with barely contained anger. "They've been using dogs like him in some twisted military project. They try to implant devices in their brains, control them, force them to do things they never would have done. They've been using animals as tools for years. But Max, well, he's different." Emma's heart sank as Rachel spoke. She had suspected something was wrong, but hearing it from Rachel made it all too real. Max was no ordinary dog. He had been part of something horrific, something that had shaped him in ways Emma couldn't even imagine. Danny looked up at Rachel, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "Max doesn't want to hurt anyone. He's not a soldier." Rachel's face softened. She had been around enough animals to know that sometimes they were more human than the people who mistreated them. She leaned forward slightly, looking directly at Danny. "No, he's not a soldier. He's a survivor. And so are you." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. She had never seen Danny so engaged, so alive. Max had brought something out of him that no one else had. It was as if the dog had unlocked a part of Danny's soul that had been hidden for so long. Emma had never been prouder of her son. After a brief silence, Rachel spoke again. "We have to move quickly. Blackwater doesn't give up. If they know Max is here, they'll be coming for him. We don't have much time." Emma felt the weight of Rachel's words settle over her. Time. She was running out of it, and so was Max. The thought of Blackwater finding them here, finding Max, was almost too much to bear. "What do we do?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rachel stood up and began pacing the room, her fingers tapping against her thigh, and thought, "We need to get Max out of here, and we need to make sure he's safe. They'll stop at nothing to get him back. But I have a network, a safe house, people I've worked with who are ready to help. We'll get him to safety." Emma's mind raced. A safe house, a network. She didn't know who Rachel was talking about, but the idea of moving Max again, running from the people who wanted him, filled her with dread. "I don't know," Emma said, her voice trembling. "I don't know if we can keep running. I don't know if we can outrun them." "You don't have to outrun them," Rachel said with surprising confidence. "You just need to outsmart them. And you've already started doing that by getting Max out of their hands. But we need to keep him protected. And the best way to do that is to get him out of the country. The longer we stay here, the more likely they are to find us." Emma felt her heart race again. Out of the country, it sounded like something out of a spy thriller. Was she really ready to take her son and a dog on the run across borders into the unknown? Danny's voice broke through her thoughts. "Max says he'll help us." He said, his voice filled with the kind of certainty that made Emma stop and look at him. "He knows how to hide." Rachel gave Danny a long look, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly. "If Max says he can help, I believe him. But you two aren't in this alone. We've got people. I've got people. We'll make sure you're safe." Emma glanced at Danny, his small face filled with determination. She saw him differently now. He wasn't just her son. He was a partner in this fight. She didn't have to do it alone. And for the first time in what felt like years, she didn't feel as if she was sinking. "We can't let them get him," Emma whispered. "We can't let them take him back." Rachel looked at Emma and smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "I know, Emma. I know. And we won't let them." The plan was simple in theory. They would move Max to a safe house as soon as possible. One of Rachel's trusted contacts would help arrange the next phase, and they would get Max out of the country somewhere where Blackwater couldn't reach them. But in reality, the plan was anything but simple. Emma had no idea what kind of risks they were about to take. She didn't know who these people were or how far they would go to help. But right now it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was keeping her son and the dog she had come to think of as family safe. "Max," Danny whispered, looking down at the dog, "will protect you. You're safe now." Emma's throat tightened as she watched Danny, his hand resting on Max's head. She saw the bond between them, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they would make it through. Maybe they would be okay. But as Rachel looked out the window, her face hardening, Emma's brief sense of peace was shattered. The sound of a distant engine hummed through the stillness of the night. "They're here," Rachel said, her voice low and urgent. "We don't have much time." The quiet hum of the engine was the only sound that filled the cabin as Rachel guided the truck down narrow, winding back roads. Emma sat in the passenger seat, Max at her feet, Danny beside her, both of them wrapped in blankets to ward off the cold. It was late, well past midnight, and the world outside was cloaked in darkness. The occasional flicker of headlights from distant cars passing on the highway was the only indication they were still in the world they had known. Everything felt distant now, as if the life they had once lived was already slipping away from them. They were on their way to the safe house, but the journey felt anything but safe. The weight of the night pressed down on Emma's shoulders. Every mile, every turn they took made her feel more isolated, more vulnerable. What if Blackwater was already onto them? What if they had already started tracking their movements? The fear gnawed at her insides like a slow-burning fire, and every flicker of a distant headlight made her heart race. "Are we there yet?" Danny's voice cut through her thoughts, quiet and uncertain. Emma turned to look at him, trying to muster a smile. But all she could see in his eyes was the same fear that haunted her own heart. He had been so brave, so strong for the last few days. He had found his voice again, found his courage, but Emma could see the toll it was taking on him. He was just a child, and yet here he was on the run, fighting for a dog he had come to love like a family member. "I don't know, sweetheart," Emma replied softly, "but we'll be okay. We just have to keep going." Max, sensing the tension in the air, let out a soft whine, his ears flicking back. Emma reached down, giving him a gentle pat on the head. She could feel the bond between her son and the dog growing stronger by the minute, a silent understanding that she couldn't explain. It was as if Danny and Max had known each other far longer than the few short days they had been together. They were connected in a way Emma had never understood, but she was learning to accept. Rachel didn't say much as they drove. Her hands were firmly on the wheel, her eyes scanning the road ahead. She had been a woman of few words since they had left the cabin, focused on getting them to safety. Emma couldn't blame her. The weight of the situation was heavy, and Rachel had her own role to play. She had been involved in this world far longer than Emma, and the cold, calculated way she handled the situation spoke volumes about the kind of person she was: strong, resourceful, and unyielding. But even Rachel's composure couldn't shake the tension in the air. The further they got from Riverside, the more Emma felt that sense of urgency pressing in on them. They were leaving everything behind: their home, their lives, their safety. The world they had known was fading into the rearview mirror, replaced by an uncertain future that seemed to stretch out forever. "I've been doing this for a long time," Rachel finally spoke, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was a hardness to it, a conviction that was both reassuring and chilling. "I've helped a lot of animals get out of places like Blackwater's control, but they don't give up easily. You can't outrun them forever." Emma looked at Rachel, the fear in her eyes reflected in the older woman's gaze. She knew Rachel was right. This wasn't a fight they could win by running. The people they were up against weren't just criminals. They were a force, a machine with resources and power that far outstripped anything Emma had ever known. "We have to be smart about this," Rachel continued, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. "We have to keep moving, stay one step ahead of them. But we're not just running, Emma. We're building something." Emma furrowed her brow. "Building something? What do you mean?" Rachel glanced at her briefly, a small knowing smile tugging at her lips. "This isn't just about keeping Max safe. It's about stopping what Blackwater's doing. It's about taking them down." The words hit Emma like a punch to the stomach. Take them down. What did that mean? What was Rachel really involved in? She didn't have time to ask questions. Her priority was her son and keeping Max safe. But the idea of taking on Blackwater, a shadow organization with seemingly endless resources, it seemed impossible. And yet here was Rachel talking about it, like it was something they could actually do. "I don't know how to do that," Emma said quietly, shaking her head. "I'm just trying to keep Danny and Max safe." Rachel's expression softened as she glanced over at Emma. "You're doing more than that. You're already part of something bigger than you realize. The fact that you're here, that you're helping these animals, you're already fighting. This is more than just running. This is standing up for what's right." Emma felt a wave of emotion rise in her chest, but she swallowed it back. This wasn't the time for doubts. She had made a promise to Danny and to herself. She would do whatever it took to keep them safe, whatever that meant. The truck bounced along the gravel road, and the dense trees lining the path began to open up, revealing a small, secluded house in the distance. It wasn't much, just a simple cabin nestled in the woods far from any prying eyes. But to Emma, it felt like a lifeline. Rachel pulled the truck into the small clearing and stopped in front of the cabin. "We're here," she said quietly, cutting the engine. The silence that followed felt heavy, the weight of everything that had led them here hanging in the air. Emma didn't know what to expect. She didn't know who was inside or what kind of people would be waiting for them. But as she stepped out of the truck, she knew one thing for sure: there was no turning back. "We'll be safe here for now," Rachel said, leading them toward the door. "But we have to be careful. Blackwater's not just going to sit back and wait for us to slip up. They'll be looking for us, and they won't stop until they find Max." Max's ears perked up as Rachel opened the door, his body tense with anticipation. He seemed to know what was at stake, his instincts sharper than anyone's. Danny moved ahead of Emma, leading the way into the cabin, Max following closely behind him. Inside the cabin was simple but cozy, filled with the scent of wood and earth. The walls were adorned with photographs of dogs, many of them familiar faces to Emma. These were the animals Rachel had helped, the ones she had rescued from places like Blackwater. Each picture told a story, a tale of survival and hope. Danny moved to one of the couches and sat down, resting his hand on Max's back. The dog settled beside him, his body still alert but at ease. Emma watched them, feeling a small sense of peace wash over her. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to relax just a little. Rachel set down a duffel bag and turned to Emma, her face serious again. "We don't have much time. We need to make a plan. Blackwater will be looking for us soon, and when they do, they'll come hard. We have to be ready for whatever happens next." Emma nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. She didn't know what the future held, but she did know one thing: they weren't going to stop fighting. Not while Max was still with them, and not while Danny had found his voice, his strength. They were ready, and no matter what came next, Emma knew they would face it together. The small cabin felt like a fortress surrounded by thick trees and hidden deep in the woods. But Emma knew that no matter how remote this place was, it wouldn't be long before Blackwater found them. They always found their targets. It was what they did. And even though Rachel's safe house provided a temporary refuge, Emma's anxiety hadn't eased. The danger hadn't disappeared. It was still out there waiting. The first few hours after their arrival were quiet. Rachel made tea and settled into the small living room with Emma and Danny. Max, ever vigilant, lay beside Danny on the couch, his eyes scanning the room. It was like he was always on alert, ready to move at a moment's notice. Danny, however, had his hand resting gently on Max's fur, his fingers idly stroking the dog's coat. He hadn't said much since they arrived, but his presence next to Max was enough. Emma could see the bond they shared, the way Max had become Danny's protector, his guide through a world that had grown too overwhelming. Rachel had disappeared into another room for a while, leaving Emma and Danny to sit in the quiet. Emma tried to focus on something, anything to calm her racing thoughts, but all she could think about was the mess they had gotten themselves into, the danger they were in. She had no idea how to stop it, how to keep them safe, or how to keep Max safe. And every minute that passed, the uncertainty grew. "We'll be fine, Mom," Danny said suddenly, his voice soft but firm. Emma turned to him, surprised by the strength in his words. She had seen him grow up so fast, and yet hearing him speak with such confidence was both heartening and heartbreaking. "I hope you're right, sweetheart," Emma replied, her voice barely a whisper. "But we're in more danger than ever. If Blackwater catches up to us, they won't catch us." Danny interrupted, his eyes meeting hers with a determination that made Emma pause. She had seen him like this before, when he was focused, when he had a purpose. It was the same look he had worn when he had first spoken to Max, when he had made the decision to rescue the dog from the mud. "How can you be so sure?" Emma asked, her voice full of uncertainty. Danny hesitated for a moment, his gaze dropping to Max. The dog's eyes met his, and there was something in the way they looked at each other, something deep and knowing. It was as if they shared a language that no one else could understand. "Max says they won't find us," Danny said quietly, almost as if he were speaking to the dog. "He knows how to hide. He's been hiding for a long time." Emma felt a chill run down her spine at Danny's words. "What do you mean? How do you know that?" Danny shrugged, his small shoulders rising and falling in a gesture that was so familiar, so childlike. "I don't know, Mom. I just know. Max says we have to keep moving, keep hiding, and they won't find us. He's been through worse. He can teach us how to survive." The certainty in Danny's voice was both comforting and unsettling. How could he know this? How could he speak so confidently about a dog's ability to hide and survive? Emma's mind raced, but she knew better than to question it. There was too much at stake. Before Emma could respond, Rachel reappeared, her expression grim. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low and urgent. Emma stood up, her heart skipping a beat. "What is it?" Rachel didn't waste time with pleasantries. She led them into the small kitchen, where a map of the area was pinned to the wall. "We need to make a plan," she said, her tone serious. "Blackwater's going to start tightening the noose. They'll be looking for Max, and they'll come after us. They won't stop until they get him." Emma's stomach clenched. "So what do we do now?" Rachel traced a line on the map with her finger. "I have contacts in the area, people who can help us get out of the state, but we have to move fast. I can't guarantee how long the safe house will remain safe. They have resources we can't even begin to comprehend." Danny looked up from the map, his voice unexpectedly firm. "Max says we don't have much time. They're already looking for us." Rachel's eyes flicked to Danny, her expression softening for a moment. "He's right, and Max is smarter than most people I know." Emma glanced between Danny and Rachel, the weight of their words sinking in. She didn't know what was happening to her son, but it was clear that something extraordinary was unfolding. It was like Danny had tapped into some kind of hidden knowledge. She couldn't explain it, but she didn't have to. Not right now. "What's the plan?" Emma asked, her voice steady but filled with urgency. Rachel straightened, her shoulders squared with determination. "We'll leave at first light. I've arranged for a truck to take us out of here, straight to a safer location. But we'll need to move quickly, and we'll need to stay off the grid. No phones, no social media, nothing that could be traced." Danny nodded, a serious expression on his face. "We'll be ready." Emma felt a pang of fear. It was all happening so fast. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to leave everything behind. But she had no choice. Blackwater wouldn't stop. They would keep coming for Max, for Danny, for her. And as much as Emma hated it, She knew they couldn't stay in one place for too long. Are you sure this is the best way? Emma asked, her voice tinged with doubt. Rachel met her gaze. It's the only way. We have to be ahead of them. If we're not, they'll find us. And when they do, we'll be trapped. Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It wasn't just about getting out of town. This was about making sure Max was safe, making sure Danny was safe, and taking a stand against the people who had done unspeakable things to animals like Max. We're doing the right thing, right? Emma asked, her voice trembling slightly. Rachel nodded. Yes, you're doing the right thing. But even as Rachel spoke the words, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far darker than they realized. They weren't just running from Blackwater. They were walking into a storm, a battle they couldn't fully prepare for. And Emma didn't know if they would make it out alive. The night stretched on the shadows in the cabin, growing longer. Emma sat by the fire with Danny and Max, her thoughts consumed by what lay ahead. She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her. But as she watched Danny resting beside Max, his hand gently stroking the dog's fur, she realized something. No matter how dangerous it got, no matter what came their way, they were a team. Together they would survive. Together they would fight. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The sun was barely beginning to rise as Emma, Danny, and Max packed the last of their things into the truck. The quiet of the cabin had been shattered by the urgency of their escape. Every minute that passed felt like another step closer to danger. Rachel was already in the driver's seat, the engine running, her eyes scanning the woods for any sign of movement. Emma didn't know if Rachel was more focused on getting them out safely or watching for Blackwater agents, but either way, she could tell that every second was critical. Is everything packed? Rachel asked, her voice sharp but calm. Yeah, Emma replied, zipping up the duffel bag one last time. She could feel her heart thumping in her chest, the familiar dread creeping in. This wasn't just about running anymore. It wasn't just about getting away from Blackwater. This was about doing whatever it took to keep her son and Max safe. Okay, Rachel said, glancing over at Emma and Danny. We've got a few hours before anyone even knows we've left. We need to get out of here before the trail's too hot. Once we're on the road, we'll take back roads to avoid checkpoints. Emma climbed into the truck, her mind spinning. She was trying to focus on the plan, trying to keep calm, but every thought kept circling back to one question. What would happen if Blackwater found them? What if this plan didn't work? What if they were caught? Mom Danny's voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see him looking at her, his brow furrowed in concern. We'll be okay, sweetheart, Emma said, her voice forced, but she couldn't quite convince herself. We just have to stick together. Stick to the plan. Danny didn't reply. He didn't need to. He wasn't worried. Not like Emma was. He had a calm certainty about him now, one that seemed almost unnatural for a 5-year-old. But maybe it was Max who gave him that peace. The dog, despite all the trauma he'd been through, had a quiet strength that Danny seemed to have absorbed. It was like the dog had become his shield, his protector. And Emma could see it too. Max wasn't just a dog to them. He was part of their family, and they would do whatever it took to keep him safe. Rachel hit the gas, and the truck jolted forward, pulling them away from the cabin and into the unknown. The road ahead was empty, winding and quiet. Emma glanced back through the rearview mirror one last time, her eyes scanning the dark woods behind them. There was no sign of pursuit. Yet. They drove for hours, taking back roads and country lanes, weaving through small towns and patches of forest. The landscape was beautiful, but the serenity of it all only made the tension in the truck feel heavier. They were running, and they couldn't stop. Not until they were far enough from Blackwater's reach. I'll take the first shift, keep watch, Rachel said after a while. You two get some rest. We'll need all our energy once we get to the next safe house. Emma nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling of dread. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt at ease. But there was no time for rest now. They had to keep moving. Max, sensing the unease in the air, kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his body rigid. He was calm but alert, always watching, always waiting. His loyalty to Danny was evident in every movement. Emma couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. She hadn't been able to protect her son the way Max had. She hadn't been able to shield him from the fear and pain he'd endured. But now, with Max at their side, Emma knew they had a fighting chance. As they continued their drive, Rachel spoke more about the people who were helping them, the network she had built over the years. There are safe houses all over the country, Rachel explained. We're going to one of my most trusted locations. It's off the grid, no one knows about it except for a few close friends who owe me favors. How do you know we can trust them? Emma asked, her voice full of skepticism. Rachel's eyes stayed focused on the road. Because I've helped them, and they've helped me. We've all been through hell, but we know what it's like to fight back. These are people who understand what's at stake. Emma nodded, though a part of her still felt uneasy. Could she really trust these strangers? She didn't know them. She didn't know what they were capable of. But Rachel had been in this world longer than Emma had. And if she trusted these people, then Emma had to trust her. For Danny's sake, for Max's sake. A few hours later, they reached a small town. The streets were quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Rachel slowed down as they approached the outskirts, her eyes scanning the area like a hawk. Keep your heads down, she muttered, her voice low. If we're spotted, we could be compromised. Just stick to the plan and we'll get through this. Emma nodded, pulling Danny close as they passed through the town's main street. She felt the weight of every passing minute, the tension building in her chest. They didn't belong here. They didn't belong anywhere anymore. They were outsiders, fugitives, with nowhere to go but forward. As they left the town behind, the landscape changed. The trees grew denser, the air heavier, as if they were moving deeper into a place where even the sky couldn't reach. Emma felt her stomach twist with nerves. Were they close? How long before Blackwater would catch up to them? Rachel, Emma said, her voice trembling slightly. How far are we from the next safe house? We're getting close, Rachel replied. Just keep your eyes peeled. Emma kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead, her thoughts racing. She had no idea what awaited them at the safe house. Was it truly secure? Would they find sanctuary there? Or would it be another trap she had no way of knowing? All she had was the hope that Rachel's network would be enough to keep them safe even for just a little while longer. They drove for what felt like an eternity, the landscape shifting with every mile. Emma was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't let her rest. She couldn't stop thinking about Blackwater, about the people who would do anything to get Max back, and about what they might do to get him. They had to be prepared for anything. But what did that mean? How could they prepare for a fight against an enemy who operated in the shadows, an enemy with unlimited resources? Eventually, Rachel pulled the truck off the main road and onto a dirt path that led into the woods. We're here, she said quietly, her voice filled with relief. The cabin that greeted them was small, nestled in the woods with a view of a peaceful creek. It was the kind of place you'd never expect to find in a world as dangerous as the one Emma was now living in. But she had learned to expect the unexpected. Nothing about their lives was normal anymore. Stay close, Rachel said as she parked the truck. We need to keep moving. They won't stop until they find us. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she followed Rachel into the cabin, Danny and Max close behind. As she stepped inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched. Blackwater was out there somewhere, and they weren't going to give up. But as she looked at Danny sitting with Max by the fire, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. They had made it this far, and no matter what came next, they would keep fighting. They would keep running. Together. The air was thick with tension as Emma stepped out of the cabin, her boots crunching against the dry leaves that littered the forest floor. The sky had grown darker, the wind picking up slightly, as if nature itself was warning them. She glanced over her shoulder at the small weathered cabin nestled in the trees. It had offered them a brief moment of peace, but Emma knew it wouldn't last. Not for long. Behind her, Danny was talking softly to Max, the dog curled up next to him on a makeshift blanket. The bond between her son and the German Shepherd had only grown deeper since they had first met. It was more than just a partnership, it was a lifeline. Max had become Danny's protector, and in many ways, Danny had become Max's. They were two souls intertwined, each with a strength the other could lean on. Rachel had stepped inside to gather a few things, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings as she moved. Her earlier confidence had faded, slightly replaced by a quiet wariness. She knew what was coming. They all did. Blackwater would stop at nothing to get Max back. They had seen it before with other animals, other people. Mom, what's going to happen? Danny's voice broke through Emma's thoughts. She turned to him, her heart aching, as she saw the uncertainty in his eyes. The boy who had once been so quiet and withdrawn had found a voice of purpose. And yet Emma could see that the fear of the unknown still lingered beneath the surface. We're going to be okay, Danny, Emma said, though her voice wavered with the weight of the words. She didn't know how long they would be safe, but she knew they couldn't stop now. They couldn't give up. Rachel emerged from the cabin, her expression grim. She didn't need to say anything. Emma could read her face, could feel the urgency in the air. Time was running out. Get ready, Rachel said, her voice steady. They found us. I can feel it.